The plot thickens. It's time. Let's uncover the full story of Salvation Pass. Welcome to Mindspike. As with any detailed lore walkthrough of tangentially inaccessible content, here's the obligatory spoiler warning before we proceed any further, because yeah, at this point in time, a lot of people still have not completed the Raid Wing Salvation Pass, and so for anyone who does not wish to have the story spoiled prematurely, this is your chance to get the hell out before all hell breaks loose. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get to the core of it all. As a side note though, before I begin, the wing was completed much earlier than most people expected it would, and thus many of the details were openly shared way earlier than I thought it would. Thus, much of what I might say during the summary part of this video has already been spoiled for some of you, but regardless, I've got quite a few thoughts and theories here as well, so without further ado, let's get into it. The new Raid Wing, amply named Salvation Pass, is of course the successor to Spirit Veil and takes place immediately after the death of Sabbatha the Saboteur, the final boss of the first wing. As her Bandit Camp was cleared out and the captive packed soldiers rescued, we push through the gate and into Salvation Pass. Now, first of all, I have to mention that most of the notes and hints that you encounter as you progress through Salvation Pass are either illegible or, as your character states at certain times, you're simply in too much of a hurry. This effectively works to create urgency and create the feeling that for whatever reason, we're in a hurry to get to the end. And so for this video, I'll be going over the story as ArenaNet intended it chronologically to play out. As we enter Salvation Pass, we find ourselves in a large cave flowing with magic. Here we find the first torn pages of scripture, which amply sets the mood. More than half of us have been dragged away, especially those who fight, resist, or curse them. We believe they've been murdered, and so we remain stoic in the face of this abuse. The brigands treat us like animals, only kept alive as long as we earn our feet. They believe, it seems, that a higher power dictates their lack of mercy. They believe themselves superior. Throughout the history of Guild Wars, we've seen a fair share of fanatics believing in higher powers, but this immediately comes off as very suspicious, and we've barely even started. Other than the note within this cave, we also encounter the first creature, or the first boss per se, Slothosaur. Now, in actuality, as cool and intricate as the fight with Slothosaur is, I'm only going to focus on the story in this video, and Slothosaur seems to have a very simple story in the grand scheme of all things considered, but still, it is noteworthy. At first glance, when you look upon him, he seems to be a giant, mutated sloth, and I believe that that's exactly what he is, not much more really. As he's been sleeping in his cave, he's gradually absorbed a whole lot of magic into himself, possibly from the windstorm caused by the death of Mordramoth, the same windstorm that seemed to have riled up the spirits in Spirit Veil and brought life to the Veil Guardian, or just from the ever-flowing streams of magic that decorate his cave. Either way, as you kill him, the magic within explodes outwards and leaves his body, only to join the flow of magic visualized all over this cave. Speaking of, does this magical flow look weird to you guys as well? When have we ever seen magic take on this yellowish color? Trust me, we'll get back to that in a bit. With Slothosaur dead, we leave the cave, only to find ourselves directly on the other side of the giant man-made wall that we first saw back when we entered Spirit Veil. Behind it is a massive open field filled with bandits, mushrooms, pocket raptors, insects, and clues. Here we finally learn more about what has been happening behind the wall, as we find a tiny bandit camp close to the wall surrounding a burn pit. Your character may note that people have been burned here and that those people were rural folk. This detail is also further emphasized as you find unburned corpses not far from the pit, and as you interact with one of them, you find that this particular corpse is from Beetlestone, the tiny Crichton village. If we rummage through the camp a bit more, we find a note. That damn Gorsival keeps killing everything that goes near it. Knuckles said it's too dangerous to dump the bodies in the woods. We'll dispose of them another way. Beside this note lies a bloodstone dagger speckled with dried blood, so I guess we can safely assume that some form of sacrificial ordeal has been taking place perhaps at the burn pit, as the dagger lies next to it, but it seems bigger than so. Another note in the camp tells us more about our lost squad commander, Bennett. Separated Bennett from the rest of the prisoners, Matthias wanted to talk to him personally, move the others to camp until he decides what to do with them. This is the first time we hear about Matthias, whoever he might be at this point. But trust me, it's not the last we hear of him. In the very center of the massive field, we find a much larger bandit camp, which holds prisoners. Unfortunately for us, they're pretty heavily guarded, as in they're guarded by the second raid boss, or should I say, bosses. Berg, Sane, Norella, and their continuously spawning array of bandits. This fight is a myriad of interactable objects. Luckily, and this may come as a mechanic spoiler to some of you guys, in the earlier smaller camp you could also read about these bosses. We learn that Berg is allergic to bees, Sane is an asshole who spit into the worst cages, so they want to kill him badly, and Norella was apparently Sabbatha's protege and learned from Sabbatha how to remix her flamethrower fuel. Luckily for us, it ignites with the smallest spark. As we kill the bandits and save the prisoners, we get to have a little chat with them.
Priest Duena, we would have ended up like the others if you hadn't come.
What do you mean?
There's more of us, along with a soldier they brought here.
Where were they taken?
To the north. No one they've taken there has ever returned.
We've cleared a path to the outside of the compound. Gather your people and head through the cave to the east. There's a pack camp at the jungle entrance. They'll tend to your wounds. Go.
So off to the north we go, but first, at the top of the camp we find Norella's journal, which reads, "The word around camp is Sabbatha and her crew are all dead, killed by some unbelievers. So help me Saul, if they set foot in this camp, I'll skin them alive. My mentor will not go unavenged." I'm sorry, what? Saul? The Saul? Are you for real? This is actually happening, isn't it? No more denying the inevitable. We're heading north, like right now. As we fly up, we find one last note, which I'm going to read in its entirety. "For a week now, I've been listening to these brigands when they think I couldn't hear them. They dismiss me as a threat, perhaps because of my advanced age. Based on what they've said, I believe they have agents in both Divinity's Reach and the Black Citadel working behind the scenes to influence those in power there. Their corruption is far spread. They speak of Kryta as if it were stolen from them. Logic tells me that their intended outcome is to usurp the throne. More boldly, they speak of power as if it were the trophy they seek." I said early on that I was going to tell the story as it was intended chronologically by ArenaNet, so at this point I'm really just containing my excitement for what this all implies. Let's finish the initial build-up and then let's speculate about the implications of everything, shall we? Because of this, I'll skip rather elegantly over a few details, such as the confirmation that the Mordrum vines are completely devoid of life, even though one of them is actually still alive. The prisoners we meet inside the labor camp who are scared shitless, the discarded corpses, and the ghost you can only get in contact with if you are a necromancer, the random inclusion of an entity referred to only as him, the gravestones with oddly familiar names, as well as the Asura Gate, which finally binds it all together. The Asura Gate, which leads to Fort Vandal in Brisbane Wildlands. I'm skipping all of this for now to get to the end, to the Temple of Salvation. Inside the temple, we find Matthias, and he is sacrificing people to a bloodstone. Now, if you hadn't seen this coming by now, either from the 100 clues that this entire wing has been building up with, or the actual flags hanging outside of the temple, as Matthias evokes his power of the bloodstone within himself and transforms, he yells, "Bow before the white mantle!" Oh yeah, we were right guys, it's the white mantle. ArenaNet actually did it in the end. And so to quickly return to the previous notes that I read aloud for you guys, yes, Norella was indeed referring to Saul Delesio, the founder of the white mantle, the first to lay eyes on the Mersat, and yes, it seems that the White Mantle are once again trying to take the Krytan throne as they've infiltrated several bodies of power. This storyline has had the absolute biggest story build-up of all times. A storyline obviously stretching back to the early days of the original game, but as some of you may have also be familiar with, it's even been a story that has been a part of the Guild Wars 2 universe. The White Mantle has been present even during the low levels of the human personal story in Beetlestone, which is apparently where they initially started snatching people to sacrifice for the Bloodstone, possibly by bringing them to Fort Vandal to send them directly to the Temple of Salvation. As Fort Vandal was breached by Mordrum and we entered into the Silver Waste, we found hidden nodes all over the map bearing the White Mantle symbol. The gate must have been destroyed, and so the bandits were summoned back to protect the temple, I presume, or possibly something even bigger. Honestly, there are 1,000 details that I could talk about regarding the White Mantle, but I would only be digressing. After all, now that the ultimate veil has been pulled away, let's investigate it deeper. As we kill Matthias, we are able to read a lot more notes that are scattered around, all of which helps us to paint a clearer picture. Seduced by the promise of power, I've seen no sign they're back other than the Mantle's fanaticism. Something has stirred their passions. They've waited in the shadows, and now, magic of their Inquisitor, he has more than anyone should have. It radiates when he to the camp seeking new victims. I begin to fear not just for us, but for Kryta and all of Tyria. I believe this particular piece of text referred to Matthias and his immense power. As it stands, it seems as if he himself has been absorbing some of the magic radiating from the Bloodstone, which I believe he's spent too much time being too close to. Matthias can't control his power. Snowstorms just appear without warning. His temperament has gotten worse too. He's been sacrificing prisoners almost at random. They're terrified. So are we. Drunk with power and with an unquenchable thirst, Matthias must have simply wanted more power, but for what exactly? To answer that, I'll read aloud a somewhat cryptic note. They truly believe that the people they sacrifice are fueling their magic, and they say something big is about to happen. They said, and I quote, "We will once again rule Kryta when he gets here." I don't know who he is. He! Who is he? This is the second time that an entity referred to as he has come up in this wing. Actually, the third, because as you're killing Matthias, every time he attempts to sacrifice a member of the squad, he exclaims, "Your sacrifice will bring him life." Well, as Matthias dies, we see this.
The Mersat preyed on the weak and impressionable, who in turn worshipped them as gods. Calling themselves the White Mantle, these converts sacrificed innocents and toppled the Crichton monarchy. The chaos they inflicted on Tyria was short-lived. They were eventually crushed, and their scattered remnants went into hiding. But pockets of their fanatical followers have been operating in the shadows ever since.
Nobody, and I mean nobody, can discard the obvious connotation implied with this final image. Lazarus the Dire, the last Mossad who survived the events of the first game and the killing of all other Mossad. He is still around, and he is the reason for all of this.
Lazarus was the last surviving Mossad, though most theorize he wandered off to die. But if the White Mantle are actively sacrificing innocents, it's not a stretch to think the Mersat are also benefiting. Lazarus, if he's alive, may be under their protection.
Now here's the thing, right? I don't believe that Lazarus is actually alive, per se. Every time he is referenced, it's always in relation to some kind of awakening, resurrection. Perhaps he's close to being resurrected, as it was noted that something stirred the Mantle's passion, but I don't believe that he is alive at this current time. See, years ago, when heroes of old encountered Lazarus, he had split himself into several aspects contained within prominent members of the White Mantle to protect himself, much like you'd imagine Voldemort did with the Horcruxes in Harry Potter, actually. Now, the reason why Lazarus went into hiding to recover was because one aspect of himself had been corrupted within the body of Justicia Navid, and so as Lazarus tried to claim it, his own power turned on it. Over time, he may have degenerated to the point where he may as well just be considered dead, and so to bring him back to life, it would seem as if the White Mantle had been charging bloodstones to collect enough magic or souls to resurrect a near-dead or actually dead Lazarus, which is why there are barrels of charged bloodstone shards ready for transport. But where to? Simply looking at the map of Salvation Pass, there seems to be no obvious exit per se, but I'll bet you that we'll find him exactly where we once saw the long lost bloodstone, just a tiny bit further west from the Temple of Salvation. Now, I actually do not believe that we'll see the Mossad Lazarus the Dire return as the final boss of this raid. I honestly believe that he is as good as dead, especially now that we've effectively destroyed his main source of soul energy, the bloodstone that Matthias was charging. I believe that the reason why he's still dead after so many years of soul harvesting from the White Mantle is because they've only been sacrificing rural people, when in fact, what is needed for Lazarus to return is an extremely powerful source of magic. What I believe is needed is the sacrifice of ascended heroes, which is exactly why Matthias exclaims that specifically our sacrifice will bring him back to life. I believe that perhaps the absolute biggest clue we have for the ending of the entire raid lies within the acquisition of the legendary Envoy armor. Admittedly, the theory that I'm about to share with you guys is somewhat far out, but regardless, I believe it may actually hold some form of insight at least, so hear me out. We know for a fact from official statements that the entire raid has a spirit theme, if you hadn't already noticed. This is highlighted in several ways. For one, the entire first wing spirit veil is completely filled with spirits. There's even a river of spirits. In the second wing, however, the theme is not as obvious. Throughout Salvation Pass, we encounter several confused spirits. They're there till you get too close to them. They say something incoherent and they fade away for no good reason. If you talk to Bennett after he's been rescued from Matthias and ask him about the spirits lurking all over Salvation Pass, he'll tell you that the shock wave from Morjamoth's death possibly released the spirits. To most, they may indeed just seem like a super random element of the wing, simply installed to keep the spiritual theme going. To reflect this theme throughout the Legendary Collection for both raid wings, practically everything is focused around spirits as well, or at least something within the wings themselves, except for a few pieces, but most prominently the things related to the Exalted. Now, this connection between the Exalted and the Envoy armor may make sense if we assume that Exalted are merely regarded as spirits locked within their shiny armor, but what if, in fact, the Exalted and Mossad are actually more alike than what we've been led to believe? I'll be perfectly honest, I can only attest the initial concept of this theory to Mr. Wooden Potatoes, who put forth the argument that perhaps, just like the Exalted are entities solely made up of their spiritual core and the armor that holds it together, so might the Mossad be, just much older than the Exalted. If this is true, perhaps that is the sole reason why Mossad will never die of old age. They're literally thousands of years old, just like the Exalted theoretically could become. But for Lazarus specifically, he lost a part of himself long ago, and the rest of him was corrupted. Perhaps, and this is where the theory starts to get a little wild, perhaps the way that the Mossad were able to survive the last rise of the Elder Dragon was because they transferred their souls into these protective shells, making them not only immortal, but also making them able to hide these shells from the plane of reality. A bit far out, I know, but if this is true to any degree, we could probably also believe that the reason why Lazarus would need souls to be resurrected is because he needs the life force inherent in these, and not just the magic. After all, he was, and probably still is, a necromancer. I believe that Lazarus is in such a dire state that we might not even see his body or soul fully resurrected for us to simply kill again. But then again, perhaps I'm wrong, since the clues that we have seem to point in an obvious direction. I just don't see how they're going to resurrect him now if he's not already alive, especially because, as I said, we basically just destroyed their main source of magical income. To me, I guess, it would just seem too obvious for ArenaNet to make him this giant boss that suddenly appears out of nowhere, basically. On the flip side, however, what would be cooler than, in the end, the final step to acquire the Envoy armor would be to escort the spiritual essence of Lazarus to the other side. But maybe that's just me. However, because I see the giant loopholes in my theory, to contradict my own proposed theory, I'd like to add another element to the mix, this magical flow, which is visible all over Salvation Pass. Never have we ever seen ley lines take this color, and so I'd like to propose that this flow is actually a completely different thing altogether. Here's why. When you finish the 5 pieces of the Legendary Collection for Salvation Pass, you'll get an item called a Spirit Quest Tonic, which has a really cool effect with ghosts flying all around you. Now, I've been racking my brain for days on end as to what this quest actually might be, until I suddenly noticed that the spirits flying around you will change their appearance in the middle of it all. To cut it short, while suspended in midair, some of the spirits will simply turn into what appears to be a cloud of magic. And so, what if this magical flow is actually just the river of spirits flowing more relaxed and broken down to its base material? Magic. That would explain why it flows directly towards the Temple of Salvation and the Bloodstone within it, as well as it would give Lazarus an interesting source to which he might be resurrected from. It's a possibility, but if I'm honest, I don't actually think we'll fight him. I do, however, believe that we will get to see him, one way or another. But how do you guys feel about that? I'd love to hear your crazy theories about what you believe will happen in the third and final wing of this raid in the comment section down below. I am absolutely dying to see what this leads to. Maybe we'll see how a modern day and ultra buffed Mossad looks like, or maybe we might just see the remnants of a long dead one. Either way, I want to see a modern day portrayal of the Mossad. But for now, that's all I've got for you guys this time. Thank you all for watching. Until next time, I will see you in the mists.